The Shadows Trace is out on Netflix, Indonesian action film from director Timo Tjahjanto, who previously made The Night Comes For Us. This film follows 13, a teenage female assassin who is a member of a clandestine organization called The Shadows. In the opening sequence, we see her almost botch a job and she has to be bailed out by her mentor Umbra. 13 is then shipped back to her apartment in Jakarta and told to wait for her next assignment. But she waits and waits and waits and she gets restless. And meanwhile, her neighbor gets murdered by some local thugs and leaves behind a young son. 13 begins to befriend the boy, and when the boy suddenly gets kidnapped as well, she goes on a warpath to get him back. So it's in theory a very simple and straightforward film that unfortunately ends up being rather disappointing, mainly because it doesn't stay true to that promise of its own simplicity. What I mean by that is the movie is, first of all, way too long for this type of film. 2 hours, 24 minutes. You can't do that. And devotes a lot of that time on unnecessary world building, slow scenes of dialogue, half-hearted attempts at protagonist backstory, and a completely obsolete subplot with Umbra, the mentor. I would have been more on board if this was just some mysterious but competently dangerous person on a quest of vengeance to bring justice to regular folk and beat up bad guys. Something like The Equalizer. But because so much of the film is stuff other than just this, it becomes boring and tedious. And it certainly doesn't help that the writing is not great. I mean, the plot makes the less sense the more it goes on. Some characters' decisions are absurd, some logistics made me scratch my head, and even the action is not all amazing. The gunplay was rather mediocre and the cuts and quick camera work in some scenes was too choppy. But when it goes hard on the martial arts and hand-to-hand combat, it goes really hard. I mean, those sequences are definitely the highlight and the meat of the film. They are clearly over the top and sort of heightened reality with the amount of ultra violence and punishment that these characters are able to take, yet keep on getting up and keep on fighting. But it is entertaining, I'm not gonna lie. Some of those scenes made me wince and sit up and watch in equal parts with interest and disgust. But again, sadly, those sequences are too far in between, and everything else kind of takes the wind away from the movie. Maybe just cutting out the Umbra subplot and the entire ending sequence, which is just unnecessary sequel bait, would have been enough to improve. Maybe you'd need to cut even more. I don't know. What I do know is that what we got, the end product as it is, ends up being a few amazing, brutal fights that get lost in an otherwise mediocre and boring movie.